Basically, the Alter Rebbe was mentioning over here about the someone who can occupy himself in learning Torah, yet he occupies himself in Dvarim B'Telim. He began with Dvarim B'Telim, which is in vain talk. We say vain talk, which means things which are trivial talk without any meaning. So again, if someone, he can learn Torah, so there's a problem that there's a transgression over here, that he instead of learning Torah, he's involved in this trivial type of talk, as opposed to someone who cannot learn Torah. So there's no clear transgression, which usually, again, he's reprimanded. The retribution is Gehenim. But he would need, just because, again, it's Dvarim B'Telim, there's the process of Kaf HaKela. We elaborated on this last week. Then the Alter Rebbe adds, similarly, someone who puts his mind into secular studies. So you have, again, the two dimensions which are dealing with this problem in the person's Avodas Hashem and the person's service to God. One, someone who cannot learn Torah. He cannot learn Torah means he's somebody he's an ignoramus, and he puts his mind to that, so then he doesn't have, it's not the clear transgression of Limud Torah, Talmud Torah, as opposed to someone who can learn Torah, and there's no meaning. It does not contribute to nothing in his life. No, not his wealth, not his understanding of Torah, just wasting. In other words, he could sit and learn Torah and gets his mind involved in secular studies, again, without no benefit. It contributes to nothing, as no thing. So then there's obvious transgression, because, as we mentioned, the mitzvah of Limud Torah is that we utilize every spare moment to learn Torah. So it seems to be very similar, for that matter. It seems very similar, according to, in other words, the trivial talk, Dvarim B'Telim, in vain talk, and secular studies seem to be similar, because, and again, it depends who he is. If he's ignoramus or someone who could learn Torah. If he's ignoramus, there could be a problem, but it's not as severe, because there's no clear transgression. As someone who could learn Torah and waste his time and things which, again, bring no benefit to him, so then there's a transgression of the study, in other words, of the mitzvah of learning Torah in every spare moment. Here the Alter Rebbe adds, and this is where we left off, v'oid zos, additionally, do we have that we're following? Are we all following v'oid zos? Yisera tumas, it's actually the end of 2:4, v'oid zos, which is in English was moreover, the impurity, we have that on 2:4 on the bottom. So more zaydzais he say to Master Shel Chacham so misav de Gilulim, so additional, in other words, even greater or even more severe or more problematic is the impurity of the wisdom of Ummais Ev de Gilulim, which is again literally means the nations of the idol worshippers, but in this context is referring to secular studies. Al tumas dvarim b'telim, over the impurity of just trivial talk, meaningless talk. Why? She'enei malbish mitami rak hamides miseid haruach hakodesh. He doesn't enclose, and hence does not impurify, only the characters or the attributes from the Holy Spirit of his godly soul, bitumas klipas nega, with the impurity of klipas nega, which is the klipa, which is that neutral, we call it neutral klipa. Again, we elaborated with this at length. I mentioned this as well. Always, anybody's invited always to go back to the original shiurim on the web to see the difference of klipas nega. Overall, there's the shalosh klipat atmeot, which don't have any good in it at all. Which we give the example of an apple. Where does an apple get energy from? Or some non-kosher, outright non-kosher piece of meat. The non-kosher piece of meat, no one could say, and no one should even try to think that they could elevate it. I'm going to eat it and then do a mitzvah subsequently, or consequent, or with the energy of this piece of meat, because the piece of meat is only receiving its energy from a place where there is no good. It's only tum, it's only impurity, and it comes from these very impure forces. So there's no way of elevating it. Quite on the contrary, it'll bring the person with his Torah, with his prayer, whatever good, so to say, good deed he would do after. as opposed to, let's say, someone eats an apple. The apple, by definition, is not holy. It's not like a pair of tefillin or a mezuzah, but it has noga, has a little light, and it's called the neutral. We call it the neutral. Just like you're on neutral, you can go front or you can regress. You can progress or you can regress. And this is similarly. The apple could be eaten. It's neutral. It could be eaten. It's called klipas noga. It's impure, but yet noga. There's a bit of light. It could be eaten and be elevated when the person eats it with a bracha, the godly purpose, and he follows through with the godly purpose. And so the apple is elevated to kedusha. It becomes like an olah, comes like a sacrifice brought on the altar. And then if he utilizes the energy of that apple, even if he would make a bracha, but he utilizes to do things which are negative, outright negative, outright prohibited, like we said the example last week, speaking lashon hara with the energy of the apple. So then the apple itself is brought down to the left, in other words, brought down to the world of shalosh klipsat mei. So we just again parenthetically say this, or just to understand what Alter Rebbe is trying to say over here, that he impurifies only his midas, which means his attributes, from the Holy Spirit of his of the godly soul, with the impurity of klipas nega shebidvarim betelim, in this trivial, in vain, meaningless talk, haboim misayd haruach shebi klipa, which comes from the evil spirit of klipa. Now, let me just try to explain this over here. Firstly, again, we remember from last week, dvarim betelim on their own, in vain talk on their own, there's not an outright sin. If the person is a leimed Torah, if he is someone who could learn Torah, so the wasting, you can't do two things simultaneous. You cannot do two things simultaneously. Or you're learning Torah, you're speaking Dvarim B'Teilim. So there's a problem with it, not so much with the Dvarim B'Teilim, but the problem is that you're not learning Torah in the time that you can learn Torah. What about the Dvarim B'Teilim itself? It's not holy, but it's not Shalosh Klipas Atzmeis. It belongs to that neutral Klipa. It's like an apple or a kosher piece of meat. It can go either way. In this case, you can't really go either way, but it's not intrinsically unholy, because it's not Dvarim Asurim, it's not prohibited, it's not Lashon Hara, it's not Litzan, it's just talk, in vain talk. Go ahead.
In terms of that first distinction you were making, like someone who can learn, did you mention last week that basically because of the accessibility of all sources in our day, that we would all be in that category?
I definitely would say so. It's just my guess, like yours, because you cannot say that everyone is equal. You're talking about somebody who's totally involved all his life in learning Torah. He has much more access to Torah. Torah could be on his mind a significant majority of the day. Someone who's involved in Torah, he eats, he's thinking about Torah or the Gemara he learned. But to say, it's harder to classify somebody as the ignoramus, the Am Haaretz, the classic Am Haaretz, which is defined in the time of the Talmud. The Am Haaretz, the person, it came after the Talmud as well. In every generation there are, even today, to a great extent today, the level of Amaratzis, which means people are ignorant in Torah, in a sense, quantitatively, if you divide Am Yisrael, is greater than the yesteryears to a certain extent, right? So many people don't even know nothing at all, how to keep Shabbos or anything. I mean, look at the majority. I mean, till now, hopefully, but things are going to change from now and onwards. Things are changing to the good, but you're talking about somebody who, I'm a Frum Yid. Let's say someone's going to say, I'm a Frum Yid, I keep Shabbos, and I have mezuzah on my door, and I keep tefillin, I put on tefillin every day, and overall I'm a Shomer Torah mitzvahs, but I want to keep myself, because I didn't have the education, so I'm going to remain that Am Haaretz and ignoramus, therefore I'm exempt from the obligation of learning Torah. Today, that's where I came in, and I said, today, if someone's honest with himself, we cannot say that, because there's so much, we have such access to Sfarim. If you don't know Hebrew, you'll have it in English, and if you don't know English, you'll have it in French, and if you're not in French, in Spanish, in every language practically, which is spoken wherever the Jews are found. You have the access to open a Gemara or a Shulchan Aruch or anything. I mean, obviously
this would probably apply to anybody, because the scenario you're describing is someone who's engaging in idle chatter prior to learning Torah.
Right.
So that's going to exclude the whole group of people who don't even keep Shabbos, because presumably they're not going to a shir and they're about to learn Torah.
People who do not keep Shabbos, you're saying?
Yeah. Like, in other words, when we talk about who would be subject to the various punishments, of idle chatter, it would sound like anybody who would even be learning Torah would be in the category of someone who is learned. Right,
but let me ask you this: usually it works that someone who's not keeping Shabbos, right? He doesn't find himself physically everybody has the access to walk into a Judaica store and buy any book and start learning. But he's definitely more removed to somebody who is living from a life and wants to qualify himself as an Amoritz. This is what I'm saying. In other words, the time when this term Amoritz was given is back in the Talmud. It didn't mean somebody wasn't a Shomer Shabbos. Just to clarify the term Amoritz, it meant someone who was frum, but Amoritz, he didn't know how to learn Torah. He wasn't involved in learning Torah. So here we find a little more the distinction today that when you're a frum Yid, you have such access to any type of Torah, if it's Shulchan Aruch or Gemara, more than the time of the Talmud. A guy didn't know how to, their Talmud was Aramaic also in his language, but a guy was a little off. Where was he going to go? He was going to go online to study a shir, open an English book, or a book which was in, again, Aramaic was, the Gemara was written Aramaic because most of the people spoke that language. But still, there was the people who were not involved, or they didn't have the adequate access like people have today. You want to go to shir and you don't understand it in any even you want to learn Gemara, it's on your fingertips. So it is interesting that as much as today you could say that when you're dealing with the divide of Am Yisrael, there's so many Jews among Am Yisrael which know nothing. And probably in the yesteryears they knew more, or I would say the majority of Am Yisrael was observant. You could say definitely in the time of the Talmud. I'm not going to say all of them, but it was a majority. Today, unfortunately, like I say, people are becoming closer and closer. It's today better than people are advancing. The world is advancing towards the light of Yiddishkeit, no question. But I'm talking solely and squarely about that term Am Ha'aretz, which is defined in the Talmud today. And then we're dealing with one who was a frum Yid, who was a religious Jew, and nonetheless he was kind of a person which did it all, but when it came to learning he was behind. Today, obviously no one's the same. Someone who went to yeshiva and his mind is full of Torah and appreciates Torah and can learn Torah, or his parnasa, let's say, his well-being is from Torah, if he's a teacher in yeshiva or so on, you cannot compare him to someone who is removed or not as involved in learning Torah. But in the same token, today when someone is a frum Yid, he has full access to learning Torah. He cannot, if he's honest with himself, he cannot stop and say, well, I'm that Amoritz in the time of the Talmud. That's it. I'm the same guy the Talmud. Why am I better? No, today, this is part as we get closer to the times of Mashiach, and the promise of Mashiach is that the world will be filled with the knowledge of God. This is part of the promise, that we have the shiurim and the knowledge of God, i.e. Torah and Torah study and all dimensions of Torah at our fingertips. So I just mentioned that we have to know that today, just to waste time, in a sense, someone who knows what Torah is, someone who understands what the transgression of not learning Torah in time you can learn Torah, is something that we have to realize it's something very serious, because we have the ability to learn so much Torah, and it's so accessible to us, like I said, our fingertips, or the closest Judaica store. So we have to realize it definitely becomes it's more grave when one could learn Torah and you just waste the time with anything else. Now, let's focus solely on that Dvarim B'Teilim. On that Dvarim B'Teilim, dealing with somebody who cannot learn Torah. So let's try to, not to, like I say, it could be applicable today, but just let's look at ideally the Am Ha'aretz, which cannot learn Torah, and he's doing one or the two things. Or he's involved in Dvarim B'Teilim, which we said it's not Shalosh Klipsat Meis, because again it's not intrinsically impure. What is it? It's not pure as well. It's Klippas Negas, the neutral Klippa. And therefore some retribution he gets, like we said, it's the kafakela, not purgatory, because again it's not Shalosh Klipsat Meis. And the same thing, somebody who learns secular studies, there's nothing prohibited in it. It also would be on the same level of Klippas Noiga, not Shalosh Klipsat Meis. But the Alter Rebbe is trying to equate the two and say, as we apparently equate the two, rather, Alter Rebbe is saying there's a stark difference between them. Why? And we read it inside, but we're going to try to explain this orally. When somebody, where does it come from? A person should want to speak Dvarim B'Teilim. In vain talk, just to talk. There's nothing intelligent about it. For that matter, the more intelligent a person is, the less he's involved in just trivial talk. because he's intelligent, he speaks intellectually, or he finds in his conversation among intellectuals, or he himself tries to any type of talk of his, or at least the majority of the talk of his, because he's an intellectual person, are about intellectual ideas. The notion of just speaking does not come, there's nothing profound about it. So where does it come from? So based on what Alter Rebbe explained this in the previous chapters, how man is structured, there's the intellect of man, and then there is the emotions of man, or the attributes of man. If one wants to say, naturally, the intellect are way superior than the attributes. Not everybody's intellectual, but everybody has emotions and attributes which they express themselves with. When we say not everybody's intellectual, not everybody is able to utilize or to bring out to their intellect is not particularly manifest. Everybody has something there, but you cannot compare the intellectual to the average person, because intellect is way higher, more profound than emotions. And not only that, intellect produces emotions, right? When you understand something thoroughly, then you have a drive to it. If it's love or fear, if you find it positive, so you're driven to it, you have a love to it. If you find the information being worrisome, so then you stay away from it. Yira, your fears. In other words, what produces attributes is the intellect. So intellect, by definition, is way superior than and more profound and more nafshistic, more soul type than emotions. Right? Even the animal has some type of emotion. You wouldn't find much more emotion than intellect. It could have pity, it could be kind, but intellect is gifted to man. As we said the last week also, there is a very clear connection between the intellect and speech. So when someone just allows himself to talk, in other words, to waste his time with in vain talk, where does it come from? It's more of an attribute type of expression. So he's allowing the spirit of ruach, which means the evil ruach, the evil spirit, which is associated with is attributes of klipas nega, which comes from his animal soul, to take over, which means to impurify the spirit, the Holy Spirit, the sanctified spirit, which exists in his holy attributes. Right? We Alter Rebbe, again, what he did in the very first chapters, he showed there's a set of associated with the godly soul. The way the godly soul is made up, and the same set there is in the animal soul. The godly soul has intellect and has emotion. As we mentioned in the third chapter, the intellect of the godly soul is solely about God. What is he intellectualized? God, godliness, divinity, holiness. What does the godly soul feel? Or if it has love and fear, it has love. It's loving God. It has fear. It's fearing God, etc. Conversely, the animal soul, it just is driven to be basically more animal. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's just driven to be a bit more animal, more crass, more gross, more animalistic, more material, more worldly, more inclined to physical or pleasures, whatever contributes to its pleasure. That's what the animal is all about. Does it have intellect? It has a bit of understanding. Like we said, even about the animal itself. It knows where the barn is, it knows where to eat, it knows who its owner is. It has a bit of intellect. Not really, you can't call it an intellectual animal, but it's some type of understanding it has. Similarly, the animal soul within us, when we say it intellectualizes, what is an intellectualize? Intellectualize how to obtain this which is ultimately going to contribute to its comfort. So really, if you think about the animal soul, it's much more about its attributes. Because it's about inclining myself to things which are comfortable, would make me comfortable. And if I have a brain, I'll try to figure out how to develop this drive, which is ultimately to things which are going to make me comfortable. So these are the two souls, basically, which are always in a query, or you want to say in a kind of a battle with each other. One wants the entire system to be governed by it, which is the godly soul wants to govern the whole entire system, and the animal soul wants to govern the entire system. So when you break it down over here, you see this particular battle between speaking words of Torah or expressing one's heart in a godly manner, or expressing one's heart in just in Dvarim B'Teilim. This is a battle focusing on the Ruach, on the Ruach Ra, as opposed to the Ruach HaKadosh. But what is it? It's on the world of Midot, the world of attributes. Because where does Dvarim B'Teilim, the interest of talking in vain, in other words, just regular talking, in other words, without any meaning, talk without any significance, where does it come from? It's not particularly intellectual. You find much more by the ignoramus. Go in the marketplace, or someone who doesn't have a job, or is not structured, or particularly not intellectual. They do much more talking than a person who's a bit more structured and is a bit intellectual. So when you're dealing with this particular battle, you're dealing the battle of the attributes of the negative over the attributes of the positive, of the holy soul, of the godly soul, as opposed to, okay, we'll say this is the explanation of what we did till now. Hi, how are you? As opposed to this one as well, as opposed to when you're dealing with secular studies. That's a very big. Here you're dealing with the battle between the two is a much more profound level. Because here you're dealing with the intellectual dimension of the godly soul, which is ultimately wants to intellectualize God, like we said, godliness, ultimately Torah, which is Chachmaschem or Binaschem, and then the Chachma of the animal soul, which is again this dimension which wants to intellectualize with secular studies of secular studies. So the battle is a much more sensitive battle, or rather, to say it better, the battle is dealing with much more sensitive dimension of both souls. In this case, the blemish is so much deeper, so much more profound, because intellect, by definition, is so much more profound than midah, than just attributes. So here, this is what Alter Rebbe says. On the surface, they seem to be the same. So when you're dealing with someone who could learn Torah, obviously you have the problem right away on the spot that he's wasting his time, that he's not learning Torah. But when you're dealing with somebody, the two people who cannot learn Torah, which on the surface they seem to be the same, because Dvarim B'Teilim come from Klipas Noga, and secular studies come from Klipas Nega. It's not Shalosh Klipas Atmeis. So on the surface they seem to be the same. Comes Alter Rebbe and he says, if you focus in, you'll see that there's something even more grave when you're dealing with secular studies, as opposed to just regular talk, Dvarim B'Teilim. Because Dvarim B'Teilim, the battle, or so to say, the winning of the battle, because you're speaking Dvarim B'Teilim, obviously. In other words, the animal soul is triumphing over here, over what? Over the midas, the attributes of the nefesh is the godly soul. So the battle is in a much more inferior or external dimension of the soul, as opposed to when the person invests his mind, his greatest gift with his mind, the most profound part of him, which is again the nefesh elikis is interested only in godliness and ultimately in Torah learning, Torah study, etc. When that loses the war to secular studies, the battle or the triumph of the animal soul is in much more sensitive ground.
I have a question based on what you said last week. You were saying that it's mutter if it's for parnasa.
Oh, wait, we didn't get there yet.
Oh, okay.
We're talking about when there is no gain at all.
Oh, okay. But
no gain at all.
Last week you mentioned that
absolutely, we're going to do this right now. But let's look at when there is no gain, right? I thought it was very clear. Obviously, you say you just hear no secular studies. I mean, are all the guys who are in college doing the wrong? No. Let's just say when there is no. I said it a few times because it's important to note. Again, you mentioning this, that there is no gain, no financial gain, no knowledge which is relevant or pertinent to me in no form or fashion. I have the ability, I have the hour to learn Torah, and I don't learn. I wasted time in study secular. That secular studies. That's the problem when there is a problem of bittul Torah, which that's overt transgression. But again, here we're talking about when the two people which are both ignorant people which are ignoramus, they're both amiratzim, and again on the surface they both seem to be the same, because they both can't learn Torah, and it's not holy but it's not unholy, it's klipas nega. Here the Alter Rebbe says even for the ignoramus the secular studies is much more grave than the Dvarim B'Teilim. for the reason we mentioned. And let's just see the culmination of this thought over here where we were holding. Or let's try to read this again. You read it much smoother, much easier now. So he says, when you're dealing with Dvarim B'Teilim, She'enim Malbishim Mitamei, he doesn't enclose or impurify only the attribute dimension of the Holy Spirit, of the godly soul, and it's impurifying it bitumas klipas nega, with this impurity. Again, it's not shalosh klipas atmeis, because it's not something which is by definition prohibited to talk. It's just trivial talk, meaningless talk, but tuma it is, even though it's klipas nega. Okay, but with watcha b'dvarim etelim habayim, where do they come? Misay the ruach harasha b'klipazu, from the ruach spirit associated with attributes. Benafshe Bahamis, like we said before. Not the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, i.e., the intellect of the person's soul. Ma'achar shem divri shtusu buris. It's words of silliness, and like we said, they're trivial. Buddhist, meaning to say they're completely they're not on a level. People who are silly and amioritz. Again, this is the ignoramus. Those who are ignorant. You need not to be intelligent to just talk words in vain, meaningless words. You need not to be intelligent. And what is Alter Rebbe gaining when he's saying you need not to be intelligent? What he's saying is that you're not investing your intelligence. You're not investing this profound intelligence of your soul when you speak this Dvarim B'Teilim, because even a regular person, a shaita, a bur, an amoritz, a simple layman could speak these words. And like we said before, usually you go among the laymen, they're the most to speak these words. Non-structures, just stam talk. As opposed to when you're dealing with secular studies, so the Chabad, which is the intellect of the animal soul, which is again has the klipas nega, it's not the shlos klipas atmeis, but still pure it's not, and therefore it has a great energy of impurity, and that encloses and purifies the Chabad, which is the Chachma Bin Adas, the intellect of the godly soul. The Tumas Klipas Nega, with the impurity of Klipas Nega shebechachmas elu, in these studies shenaflu shama b'shviras hakelim mibchinas hacharayim shel Chachma dekdusha. I believe in your papers is a little bit of a lengthy stretch explaining this idea. We're not going to go in at length, but it says where does the wisdom come from? We have, it says the Chazal say Chochma Bagor. It says Chochma Bagoyim Tamin. Wisdom among nations you can believe, but Torah Bagoyim Al Tamin. Torah among nations don't believe they have, but wisdom they do. The Torah acknowledges they have wisdom. This is structured wisdom, and there's no question. You can never just push it away and says, nah, that's not really intelligent. No, they have intelligence. But the question is, we know that nothing just happens on its own. When Hashem, so to say, invested intelligence into this world, it began and it essentially remains, the core of intelligence remains in Torah. Torah says, Ki you are, the Torah is the wisdom, and the Torah is the understanding. So where does the whole rich wisdom, which does definitely exist by other nations? It says, like many other things, that there was a certain, it says it's the external of the Chachma D'Kedusha. And similarly, we're just giving a little example. When Adam Arishan was in Gan Eden, I'm just going to give an example. Like I say, you could, if there is probably a little explanation in there in the English, but we're going to just try to say it because it's not part of the flow of the Alter Rebbe is saying over here. But just to give this example, was there any evil which did exist when Adam Arishan was in Gan Eden prior to his sin? Evil existed. The only thing, it was completely concealed, totally not manifest. And we saw itself. He didn't even know he was unclothed. It wasn't even on his mind. What happened after he ate? In a second, all of a sudden he realizes that he's unclothed and he has to cover himself. Adam and Chava. In other words, he lived in such a pure and holy domain. His whole mind and everything about him lived in such a holy domain that all these things were not that he just pushed it away and said, no, I'm in Gan Eden, and therefore it wasn't even an issue to him, because his whole, everything about him and his whole, wherever he was, or rather the fact that he was in Gan Eden prior to sin, the whole phenomenon of evil, evil exists when you know about it, right? Is a table affected if there's something immodest in a room? No, because it doesn't have a mind. If there's something, a person cannot daven in a room, it is immodesty, because his mind captures the immodesty, is susceptible to the immodesty, so therefore Allah says, do not daven there. What about the table and the chair? If the table has to walk out? No, it doesn't have a mind. It's not in tune to that reality. Adam Rishon prior to sin, he wasn't in tune to that reality. Hence, there wasn't. Everything about him was kaddish. So So the question is, did it exist, the whole phenomenon of impurity, or it just came about when he sinned? Well, there's different opinions. There's those who say when he sinned, that's when they entered in. But the majority, or the accepted opinion, that it existed, but it was completely submerged into the world of Kedusha. It didn't have its separate entity or identity to say, I am, and therefore be aware of me, or be aware of that, or be aware of yourself, the way they were aware of themselves subsequent to the sin. Because it was really part of, and like I say, submerged to the world of Kedusha. And therefore, he wasn't in tune to any of this reality. What happened when he sinned? When he sinned, there was a big plunge, not only in his own mind, everything plunged, all levels, starting even the whole Olam Hazeh. It says this world was a holier world. It plunged, and everything, the whole chain of world, wherever, from in other words, because everything is given over to the hand of the Jew, or starting from Adam Rishon as the first human being. Every thought and speech and action counts, because we make a change. This is based on halacha, but so we make a change in all of reality. A person thinks something positive, he's changing the world. Thinks something negative, he could bring destruction. But so what happened is that it's not that impurity didn't exist, but it was so completely nullified and subordinate to the world of Kedusha. Everything was Kedusha. Everything was holy. What happened when he sinned was, it's separated. Now I am is here as well. So the kind of and what he did was certainly severe and grave. Hashem said, do not eat it, and he went ahead and ate it. So that break, so to say, that violating Hashem's word caused not only just like something small, but it kind of was an explosion in every level. And it was very evident on himself. This is Pshuti Shel Mikra. The Pasuk says, prior to that, he had no idea of the whole phenomenon of immodesty. So it means something which existed, but it was completely submerged. In the moment that he didn't listen, something exploded, so to say. Right? We don't see the explosion right when we do something with Hashem, but there's something terribly happening. And because of that, it separated itself. It says, I am as well. And now you know the laws of immodesty, and you start realizing that you have to cover yourself. So you see over here that there exists something that it really doesn't have its own entity, but as a result of something else, it ultimately comes and gains its identity. Similarly over here, the Rebbe says, just says parenthetically, where did these wisdom come from? Hashem put wisdom in the world, he put it into Torah. So it says there was a phenomenon of Shviras HaKelim, which it is associated. It says associated with the Levana complained. He was the first one who caused that. So the disorder, it's associated with Adam Rishon's chet, Adam Rishon's sin. It was a disorder. What happened was, because of the disorder, the negative in this context is the secular wisdom gained its own identity. And look around today, people, it gains such identity that someone would say, well, they try to balance it with the wisdom of Torah. Rahman al-Itzlan. This is God's wisdom. This has infinite wisdom. As opposed to this, it's just a chiraim. It means to say it's the about face. It's the external of the holy chachma. But it got its identity when it fell by Shviras HaKelim. Literally, Shviras HaKelim means the breaking of the vessels. It's a whole topic in Kabbalah and Chassidus. But I just said a little bit just to understand that really, like everything else, what would the world be like if Adam Rishon wouldn't sin? Certainly wouldn't look like the world we have today. In other words, something very kind of an explosive level came about when other nations sinned. Similarly, Shvidas HaKelim, and the Chachmais, these Chachmais gained identity. Look around, thousands, hundreds of thousands of books, and Torah agrees and acknowledges there's a lot of intellect among these books, among these nations. It's true. When you find intellect among nations, believe in it. So I just, like I say, I don't want to elaborate further because it's not part of the flow. The main thing that the Rebbe is saying over here, where do they come from? It's wisdom, but it's not holy wisdom. If it's not holy, it's unholy. To what degree is it unholy? Not Shalosh Klipsat Meis, because there's no evil in them. Obviously, if you open a book and there's something which is things which are overtly unholy or unmodest or something, obviously that, or lashon hara, whatever it tries to go, obviously that shalosh klipsat meis, that's prohibited. Here we're dealing with this chachma, secular studies, nothing unholy about it. But it's not holy, so there is, or rather it's not shalosh klipsat meis, but holy it's not. And if it's not holy, it carries a great, and it carries a enormous unholiness to it. So this came about, again, because of the Shvidas HaKelim. So when a person, because it's unholy, so you have this battle between secular studies as opposed to, which is again trying to override not the Talmud Torah, because we're not dealing with someone who could learn Torah, but the godly soul has an interest in investing, even not in actual learning Torah, in godliness, in thinking about God, understanding God and godliness as much as a human being can understand. That's what the makeup of a godly soul is. It has no interest in understanding anything else, because it's like somebody's going to say, how do you, someone could walk, many people could walk on their hands. The average person doesn't walk on their hands because the makeup of the person, instinctively, when you tell him walk, he's walking on his feet. As we elaborate on this in the third chapter, what does the godly soul intellectualize in? Godliness, because that's the makeup. It's a part of God. The part of God has an interest to think or understand or ultimately intellectualizing godliness. So when you're dealing with a person utilizing his time, and again, we're not talking about someone who knows how to learn Torah, because then again the problem is of the Talmud Torah. Here you're talking about someone who doesn't know how to learn Torah. So what is his godly soul would do if he didn't invest his mind in these secular studies? Think about God. Maybe he doesn't understand the Gemara or Tosfos, but God would be on his mind indefinitely. So when he invests that godly soul, or he allows that godly soul to be overtaken by these secular studies, ultimately the battle has been lost in very sensitive territory, because intellect is so much more profound than anything else, any part of the person's system, even his emotions, because emotions are derivatives, they're born, they're produced, they're second level, second generation than intellect. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so as Klipat Noga,
yes,
the secular studies, would they not, like the apple, have the potential to be elevated? Excellent
point what you're saying. The only way they can be elevated, right away I would say, on the surface, no, because the apple could be eaten and then you have the strength to learn Gemara. But because it's Klipas Nega, and we know Klipas Nega by definition is that it's a neutral idea that could be, you go backwards and frontwards with it. So where's the frontwards? How could you elevate these studies? Here we go. Now we say Elohim Kain. This is what we're studying now. A person does it to bring Parnasa. So then you're taking this Klipas Nega. And again, like you're asking the question, and you're asking a very good question, because on the surface you can say, well, an apple, I could see what I could do good with it. I could eat it and make a bracha and do a good deed with the energy of that apple. But this is, we just said secular studies is secular studies. But we know, as the Alter Rebbe explained when he dealt with Klipas Nega, this is the definition of Klipas Nega. Nega means there's a little light. Noga, if you learn Yecheskel, the translation of Noga means a bit of light. So where is the light? Because it's not Shalosh Klipsat Meis, we say Shalosh Klipsat Meis has no noga inside. There's no good. And as we translate it, very clearly, starkly, the non-kosher piece of meat, it's all evil. Therefore, in other words, its energy is coming from the impure forces. Don't try to elevate it. Don't try to do a mitzvah with the strength of that piece of meat. An apple, I can, right? An apple, I can, because the apple's klipas noiga, it has a bit of noga inside. Here we call secular studies noga, klipas noiga as well. Backwards, I know, as we explained, right? Even the person you're talking about, Amaretz, cannot learn Torah. But because ultimately it's not Kedusha, so it's conquering, and it's fighting, it's conquering, it's winning, it triumphs over the most sensitive part of the Nefesh Elokis. But where is where, if it's Klipas Nega, where do we see that it can go, can it be elevated? This is basically the question. Here the Alter Rebbe is going to come and say that if someone, let's say, makes a parnasa from it, means to say that a person is blessed with children and he has to bring parnasa because he wants his kid to go in the ways of Torah. And he could become a doctor, become a lawyer, and with this he could be mefarnes. In other words, he could bring parnasa to his family, to his children, and lead them and educate them in the way of Torah. What contributed ultimately to his parnasa are these studies. So these studies are elevated to Kedusha when his children go to Cheder and his children go to yeshiva, or they eat kosher because the kosher milk costs a bit more than the non-kosher milk. What contributed to that? It's all the secular studies. If it's law, if it's medicine, this is where the Klipas Nega has its aliyah, has its elevation. Yes, ultimately similar, exactly like the apple. That you took the apple and you made a bracha and you gained strength and you're learning a piece of Gemara. The apple itself is elevated. Hence, these studies are also elevated when it contributed to this positive notion of a person living comfortable in this world with a purpose of educating himself and his entire family to Avodas Hashem, to the service of God. That's one way, and that's what this is basically the culmination of this Perek. Ela im kein that he makes it a shovel or a chisel. I don't know, how does he translate kardim? The word kardom, I think it's a chisel. Actually, you see, this is the 404. I think you have the 404, no? In any case, kardom is I think it's a chisel, in other words, to cut. But kardom is. I don't believe it says instrument. You're reading the word instrument.
I'm not sure where you are here.
In the. It says instrument, really? Okay. So there you go. And if you're looking in the Tanya, it's 3 lines before the end of the chapter 8. Oh boy, look at the time. Okay, so we're going to finish over here. Elim kinais asim kardim, and it's relachtich bahen, in other words, to cut. The hainu, for example, he gives a few examples. Lisparnis bahen rebach, to have a lot of parnasa. Okay, it's a few lines. Those don't have that paper, but it's just to understand. To have parnasa berevach. If medicine brought you that parnasa that you have in abundance, then you elevate. These studies are elevated because you have the ability. And why do you want to have parnasa berevach? Why do you want to have all this parnasa in abundance? Lavedas Hashem, to serve Hashem. Actually, you see there's 3 things over here. This is the classic. A person learns medicine or law, and with that he has a parnasa berevach, and parnasa in abundance, because he has to bring up his lavetz Hashem for his own service, and he wants to bring up his family in a comfortable manner. They should be able to serve God. So again, the studies are elevated. That's one. Another thing he says, he knows how to use it and utilize it for the service of God, or for his Torah. Now you see, the Alter Rebbe was very precise in his wording, and even letter by letter for that matter. Another time maybe we'll say, it's late to say how the famous precision of the Alter Rebbe, not only in the phrase but in the word, even in the letter. Here the Alter Rebbe adds the whole word oile teirase. You say or, so let's the latter makes sense, l'teirase, for their studies. We gave a classic example that Rambam himself wrote, that he read the books, or he used the books of the Greek knowledge in astronomy to contribute to his explaining the Kiddush HaChodesh. Okay? Here you see that's clear. Not for Parnasa, but L'Teirase. This is for Torah. So the secular studies contributed to Torah, so the secular study is elevated to the world of Kedusha. But Alter Rebbe, if you notice over here, he says, additional L'Teirase, if he wouldn't put the word in Oi, or to the Torah, then you could say, you read it together, L'Avedus Hashem L'Teirasi, to serve God via the Torah. But the Alter Rebbe writes, Oi. Oi means to say, or to Torah, means to say the words before are not necessarily associated with the picture or the puzzle or the contribution to the understanding of Torah. They're great sages. I cannot explain it. That they knew how to use the secular study L'Avedus Hashem for the service of God. And the ones that the Rebbe brings over here, V'zeu Tanya, this is the reason of the Rambam and the Ramban, the Siyatan, and again, their parties, Sha'asku Bahen, when anybody similar on their level, which got involved in these studies. It not necessarily, this proved, when you're dealing with the Rambam and the Ramban, wasn't only about the fact what the Rambam himself writes, that he used the secular studies in order to understand certain parts of Torah, in this case, let's say Kiddush HaChodesh. That's one idea. But if you think about, or rather if you focus on the L'Avedus Hashem, these great tzaddikim knew how to use or elevate these secular studies for their service to God, not necessarily where it came or where it contributed to their study or their knowledge or their understanding of Torah. How? I'm not sure, because I'm not on the level of a tzaddik, nothing close to it. But from the Alter Rebbe, you see, it's very indicative. The fact that he puts in the word Oi means to say it wasn't only for the Torah. In other words, how it contributed to their Torah knowledge or the certain ideas of Torah, as the case we just gave of Kiddush HaChodesh, but they knew how to utilize these studies for their service to God. The Rambam, the Ramban, and others as well. So we see very clearly, again, this is something exceptional. I think it's extraordinary. Not necessarily this part for sure. It's not something which is attainable to anybody, because someone who's on the level of a tzaddik could only know how to utilize secular studies. Again, not necessarily where it contributes to his knowledge of Torah. It's where just they know how. Again, they are tzaddikim, so it's certainly not attainable. Today, I can't say that someone's going to say that I need to understand the Kiddush HaChodesh and the Rambam, so I'm going to start reading books of astronomy. If he's really so interested, I think the Rambam himself build up the Torah in a way that we don't need to go there. If someone needs and he feels it could contribute, watch something, read a book about, let's say, that we're dealing with Kiddush HaChodesh, go ahead, because it's ultimately that we can say that maybe we do have access to that, or that is pertinent, or it pertains, so to say, the average person. The first idea that the person has parnasa berevach, that he has parnasa in abundance because of these studies, this is all out there today. The doctors, the lawyers, people who are involved, and they have parnasa. Maybe why do they choose that over the other? But that's what the fact is, that this is bringing them parnasa. This is something which they elevated, all their secular studies which they invested are elevated to this parnasa berevach. So again, to divide the three, there's the parnasa berevach, which is really pertinent to the average. The other extreme is really not pertinent to the average. These are tzaddikim which know how to elevate this, even in a time or in a state which does not contribute directly to their Torah. And then l'teiraseh, I think all those tzaddikim, or the Rambam, the Ramban, they laid it out all for us. But if someone needs periodically to look into something which could help them understand a Rambam or a Gemara, so you could say yes, that's also he's elevating those studies as well. Have a great evening.